Genetics. Welcome to another lesson with Teacher Gia, and that is our topic for today. Believe me if I tell you, at the end of this lesson, you will be able to define genetics, denote the factors that determine characters or genes that are passed on from parent to offspring through gametes or sex cells. You'll also be able to explain key concepts in genetics, differentiate heredity and variation, also define variation and its causes, and lastly, describe and distinguish continuous and discontinuous variation. So, let's begin. So, the first question is, define the term genetics. Genetics is a branch of biology that deals with the study of heredity and variation in living organisms. It focuses on understanding how traits and characters are passed from one generation to another or from parents to offsprings through genes, which are the basic units of heredity made up of DNA. These genes are carried in gametes, which are sperm and egg cells, and passed on during fertilization when the male and female gamete nuclei fuse. As a result, offspring inherit traits from both parents. Genetics plays a crucial role in determining physical characteristics, behaviors, and susceptibility to certain diseases. Genetics explores how this hereditable material operates in individuals and their descendants. We can briefly say genetics is the study of inheritance. The fact that the offspring of any species resemble the parents indicates that the characters in the parents are passed on to the offspring. Up to there, we have clearly defined the term genetics. We've also defined genes, which are the basic units of heredity made up of DNA, and these genes are carried in gametes. And gametes here, we're talking about the sperm and egg cells. When they fuse, they bring up an offspring who inherits traits from both parents. Factors that determine how characters or genes are passed on from parent to offspring through gametes or sex cell. In fertilization, the nucleus of the male gamete fuses with the nucleus of the female gamete. The offspring show the characteristics of both male and the female. Genetics is the study of how this hereditable material operates in individuals and their offspring. I hope that is understood. So we move to key concepts in genetics. And we'll start with genes and DNA. Genes are segments of DNA that code for proteins which perform various functions in the body. DNA, in full, is deoxyribonucleic acid, carries the genetic instructions in almost all living organisms. Chromosomes. DNA is organized into structures called chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs each, with one set inherited from each parent. Inheritance patterns. Dominant and recessive traits. Dominant traits require only one copy of a gene to be expressed, while recessive traits need 2 copies. Mendelian inheritance. Gregor Mendel's principles explain how traits are inherited through dominant and recessive alleles. We'll check that. Genetic variation. Genetic diversity arises from mutations, gene recombination during sex reproduction, and environmental influences. Genetic disorders. Some diseases result from genetic mutations, such as sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, and Huntington's disease. So those are just key concepts. We'll look at them in details as we continue. Next, we move to differentiate between heredity and variation. So heredity is the process by which genetic traits are passed from parents to offspring, while variation, the differences in traits or characteristics between individuals of the same species. Another difference is that heredity ensures the transfer of similar traits, maintaining species continuity, while variation introduces diversity within a population. The last one we're going to talk about in terms of example. An example of heredity is a child inheriting eye color from their parents. So that is hereditary. And variation, an example of variation is siblings having different heights or skin colors. So those are the three differentiation between heredity and variation. So we're going to talk about variation in plants and animal species. The meaning of variation is that it refers to differences from a standard within a species, or just say differ from a standard. Organisms or individuals belonging to the same species are similar but not identical or exactly the same in every aspect. Even identical twins differ due to environmental influences, which modifies the expression of their genetic makeup or genotype. We'll talk about genotype later. This is why genetics also deals with the study of differences between organisms belonging to the same species. So we've seen the meaning of variation. We move to causes of variation. The first cause is genes, determines the character or traits of an organism. The second cause of variation is environment, which modifies the expression of genetic traits. So those are the two main causes of variation. Our next question is describe continuous and discontinuous variation. So continuous variation, we're going to talk about characteristics. So these are traits that show a smooth gradation from one extreme to another. They are usually quantitative traits, meaning they can be measured, and this also means they can be represented by a histogram showing gradation. So let's talk about examples of continuous variation. In humans, we see a continuous variation in height, weight, or skin complexion. In animals, you can quantify them through milk production in cows, and in plants, you can see the difference in length of mature leaves, size of fruits or seeds. We move to discontinuous variation, and let's talk about characteristics of discontinuous variation. These are traits that fall into distinct groups or categories with no intermediates. They are determined by a single or few genes. They are qualitative traits, meaning they are either present or absent. And lastly, are represented using bar graphs since the data falls into separate groups. Example, in humans, we can see the discontinuous variation through blood groups, either A, B, AB, or O. Also in tongue rolling, albinism, or ability to taste phenylketonuria. I hope I've pronounced that well. In animals, we have coat color in certain species. You can clearly see that this animal has this coat color and this one doesn't. Presence or absence of horns in cattle. So I hope you've picked up something from there. Next, let us now distinguish between continuous and discontinuous variation. So in continuous variation, it shows a range of small differences in a shared trait, or we say gradual difference with no clear-cut distinctions between individuals. Discontinuous variation, it exhibits distinct separate categories of traits with no intermediate states, or say there is clear, or we can say there is clear distinct differences between individuals. So in continuous variation, like identical twins, you can see like one is a bit taller than the other. And in discontinuous variation, we can talk of a situation whereby maybe one child is suffering from albinism and the other is not. So there's a big difference. Like you can see this one has this particular disease and the other one doesn't have. Another distinguish between continuous or are we saying distinguishment or something? Please correct me. Continuous variation are controlled by multiple genes or polygenic inheritance. We say polygenic inheritance. In discontinuous variation, they are controlled by a single or few genes. Here we talk about monogenic inheritance. Also, another difference is that in continuous variation, they are strongly influenced by environmental factors. In discontinuous variation, they are less influenced by the environment. Also, examples in continuous variation, we can talk about height, weight, and skin color, while in discontinuous variation, we talk about blood groups, ability to roll the tongue, and albinism. I hope you've understood that. Also, here you can also talk about how continuous variation are quantitative, while discontinuous variation are qualitative. Okay? And also we can talk about continuous variation can be measured through histograms, while discontinuous variation are measured using bar graphs. Okay, I hope that is understood, and it's the end of our lesson for today. I hope you've enjoyed, and see you in the next lesson where we'll be talking about chromosomes, their structure, nature, and properties. I hope you'll follow me to the next lesson. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Teacher Gia's family. Let's build a community together. Bye.